Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And, we're always digging into interesting articles and cases and all that, but today we're actually looking at something a little different, a little unusual.
Yeah, we're switching gears a bit. We're diving headfirst into the world of divorce.
Divorce, everyone's favorite topic, right? But before anyone tunes out, I promise this isn't your typical episode about messy breakups. We're actually cracking open a legal document, a Canadian divorce case, Bajaj versus Bajaj.
And trust me, this one's a doozy. It's got everything: international intrigue, legal curveballs, you name it. It's a real window into how complicated these things can get.
See, I told you you'd want to stick around.
Yeah.
All right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, give us the rundown. What kind of document are we even dealing with? Is this like the final word from the judge or something? Not quite. It's called a court endorsement.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a summary of a specific issue within the larger divorce case. Think of it like a judge's notes and decision on one particular point of contention.
Okay, so like a pit stop on the way to the main event. Gotcha. But why this case? Why should our listeners even care about a random Canadian divorce, even if it is a little unusual?
Because this one goes global, my friend. We're talking a parallel legal battle happening in India, questions about international law, and a whole lot of legal maneuvering that'll make your head spin.
Okay, now you've got my attention. So, set the stage for us. Who are the main players in this transcontinental drama?
Right, so we've got Harpreet and Ravinder Bajaj. They were married for over 20 years, living in Canada since, 2003, I believe. 2 kids, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds, well, pretty standard so far.
Yeah, on the surface, you'd think so. But that's where things take a turn.
Oh, I knew there had to be a but in there somewhere. All right, spill the tea. What's the twist?
Page 4 of the document. That's when things get juicy.
Page 4, huh? I'm on the edge of my seat.
Turns out Ravinder filed a separate claim against Harpreet.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not in Canada, I'm guessing.
Nope. India.
India. All right, we're officially international now. Give me the details. What's this other claim about?
Ravinder is alleging domestic abuse. But here's the kicker. She's claiming the abuse happened while they were still living in India, before they ever set foot in Canada. And get this, she's using a specific law called the Protection for Women from Domestic Violence Act, 2005, to make her case.
Whoa. 2 court cases, 2 different countries, all stemming from one marriage. That's a lot.
You can say that again. And it creates a huge legal dilemma. You see, back in Canada, Harpreet is asking the court for what's called a severance in the divorce proceedings.
Severance. What is that? Is that like a legal word for ghosting your ex? Because I've seen some people try that.
I wish it were that simple. Basically, he wants to separate the divorce itself from all the other stuff they're fighting about, property, finances, all that jazz. He's basically saying, look, I've met the requirements for a divorce. Let's get that part over with.
So he wants to be officially divorced, even with this other case still going on in India.
Precisely. He wants a clean break, legally speaking, and he wants it now. But naturally, Ravinder's pushing back. She's arguing that severing the divorce in Canada could seriously mess up her case back in India.
Oh, this is getting good. So it's a strategic battle then, like she's trying to use the Canadian divorce as leverage.
You got it. It happens all the time in these kinds of cases, especially when you factor in international laws and jurisdictions. It becomes a real game of legal chess.
Wow, it's like they're playing 4D chess with their lives here.
It's a lot more common than you'd think,
Yeah.
especially as the world gets more, intertwined. People move around, relationships span borders. It's fascinating, really.
It's definitely more exciting than my last divorce filing. But, okay, so what's the strategy here? Why is it so important for this guy, Harpreet, to sever the divorce? Like, he's moved on, he's in Canada. Why does it matter?
Well, think about it. Severance equals a clean break. Yeah, at least legally speaking, right. He's met the requirements in Canada for divorce. So severing it from everything else, it simplifies things for him, potentially.
So he can, like, remarry, or is it more about just having that clean break on paper?
Could be both. It removes uncertainty, lets him move forward with his life. Maybe there are financial implications, too. It's hard to say without knowing all the specifics, but you can see the appeal for him.
Definitely. And for Ravinder, it sounds like keeping things linked gives her some kind of leverage, right?
Exactly. It's classic family law, to be honest. As long as that Canadian divorce is hanging in the balance, she's got something to bargain with.
Negotiating power.
Exactly. Property division, maybe even spousal support, things like that. It's all on the table.
Wow. It makes you think twice about signing a prenup, doesn't it? or I guess not signing one, depending on your perspective. But okay, you mentioned something earlier about experts being brought in from India. That sounds complicated.
Oh, it was. They essentially had to explain Indian law to a Canadian court.
Like a crash course in international law.
Pretty much. Both sides brought in their own experts, and of course, they had totally different interpretations of how this whole Domestic Violence Act in India would play out.
Okay, drama. Lay it on me. What did they say? Did a Canadian divorce really have the power to impact this woman's case in India or not?
All right, so Harpreet's expert, he argued that the Indian Act, this Domestic Violence Act, it defines a domestic relationship. And get this, it doesn't automatically end with a divorce.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and he even brought up examples, past cases in India, some from their highest court, to prove his point.
So he's saying even though the alleged abuse happened years ago in another country, it doesn't matter.
Exactly, because according to him, under Indian law, it all happened during their marriage, so it's fair game. She can still go after damages, divorce, or no divorce.
Wow. Bold strategy. All right, so what about Ravinder's side? What was their counter-argument?
Okay, so her lawyer, he came back swinging, right? He said, hold on, changing her marital status to divorced, even in Canada, could throw a wrench in things.
Like, legally speaking, it muddies the waters.
Exactly. He argued that even if it's not a slam dunk, it could make her case in India way more complicated. Judges, they might see a divorced woman differently than a still married woman in this context, even if it was a Canadian court that granted it. It throws a wrench in the whole thing.
Fascinating. Two totally different takes on how these legal systems would interact. So who did the judge side with? I need to know.
Well, ultimately, the judge found Harpreet's expert more convincing. The way he explained the Domestic Violence Act and those Indian court cases he brought up, it seemed pretty airtight.
So in their view, severing the divorce in Canada, it wouldn't actually, legally derail her claims in India?
Exactly. But, and this is important, the judge made it very clear that they weren't taking sides on the actual abuse allegations.
They weren't saying whether they believed her or not.
Exactly. That was not their place, they said. That's for the Indian courts to decide. The judge's job here was to rule on the severance, nothing more.
Sticking to their lane, like a good judge should.
Exactly. It's a great example of how a judge has to separate their own opinions from the legal question in front of them.
That makes sense. They weren't ruling on the whole divorce, just this one little or not so little part of it.
Right. And it highlights something really important about the law, I think. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's always context, personal histories, different legal systems. It all gets tangled up.
So it's not always about right and wrong, but about navigating this web of rules and, figuring things out, even when it's messy.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's wild to think about, right? This whole other case, this whole other legal battle is playing out somewhere else, and we're only seeing this tiny piece of it.
It's like a legal drama with subtitles.
Mm.
We're getting a glimpse into another world, another legal system, and how it all intersects with our own.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted, just assuming everyone plays by the same rules.
Absolutely. And how messy it can get when those rules collide.
Okay, so for our listener who's probably thinking, all right, interesting case and all, but I'm not planning on getting divorced anytime soon, at least not internationally. What's the takeaway here? What's the big lesson?
I think this case is a great example of how life and the law, they don't always follow a straight line. It's not always clear-cut, Things get complicated, especially in a globalized world.
Right. Like, people fall in love, they move, they build lives together, and sometimes those lives end up spanning continents, legal systems, all of it.
And this case is just one example of the challenges that can pop up along the way. It really makes you think about those what-if scenarios.
It does. What if you find yourself caught between two sets of rules? Two countries' laws. How do you even begin to navigate that?
Exactly. It's a question more and more people are facing, and frankly, it's one that courts around the world are still trying to figure out.
It's a lot to unpack. And, I keep thinking about the human side of all this. Like, we're talking about laws and courts, but this is someone's life.
It's easy to forget that, isn't it, when you're caught up in the legal back and forth. But at the heart of it, this is about real people, real families, trying to find their way through a very complicated situation.
This whole case, it reminds me of that old saying, life is messy.
Isn't it, though? And sometimes the law is even messier. But, that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We get to explore those messy places, those gray areas where things aren't always so clear-cut.
Well said. Well, deep dive listeners, that's about all the time we have for today. But before we go, any final thoughts for our listeners out there navigating the complexities of their own lives?
What strikes me most about this case is that it's not really a story about winning or losing. It's about finding a way forward, even if that way forward is, well, messy and complicated. It's a good reminder that the law, like life, is rarely black and white. There are always shades of gray.
Very true. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those shades of gray. Until next time, deep dive listeners.